come into being, and how key democracy was, especially during World War One, World War Two, and then 1945 to 1966, and the recovery of psychoanalysis in Europe, because psychoanalysis had almost been decimated during World War II, as you know. I think recovering from that is quite remarkable. And the way the leaders, our ancestors of psychoanalysis, created and organized EPF with much difficulty, much struggle in terms of languages and cultures. But to get to where we are now, I think is a remarkable achievement and something to really celebrate. Intersection between psychoanalysis and democracy as an ideal, as something that is so important in terms of fairness and equality. And this is what I think EPF represents now. And then, of course, there's Winnicott's paper on democracy and how he applied his ideas of psychoanalysis post World War II in 1950, and the particular intellectual and clinical environment that Winnicott was evolving his ideas, especially in relation to Melanie Klein's work. And the Freudians who came to the British Society just before World War II, those tensions were very much in the British Society and still very much are. They're still quite alive. The differences between different ways of thinking about psychoanalysis, different ways of developing psychoanalysis. I think, obviously, from his background, Winnicott having had a 10-year analysis with James Strachey, whose own analysis was with Freud for a couple of years, although as Winnicott says in the obituary to James Strachey, he wasn't sure it was such an analysis as we would have nowadays. But I think this lineage in Winnicott's work means that Winnicott was always, in a way, having a dialogue with Freud. According to his wife, widow Claire Winnicott, Winnicott was always reading Freud whenever he had any moments spare, which weren't very many, I think. He would always be reading Freud, and in a way always talking to Freud, and in the same way talking to Klein too. And I've suggested in various places, I think this was really sharpening his arguments and his formulations into a more, what Thomas Ogden has referred to as a more ontological psychoanalysis, but very much with the roots in his classical analysis with James Strachey. And this is how we came up with the title. And of course, 60 years past, present, and future, we want to look back, celebrate the past, see what's happening in the present, which of course is a great threat to the world, especially in Europe, and to psychoanalysis, and how to move forward in the future in a democratic environment that is not only manifested externally, but also internally. So the presentation that I'll be giving is related to democratic object relations, which inevitably brings in totalitarian object relations. And maybe we could start to think of that in terms of our patients, where there are so many divisions and polarizations. This is how psychoanalysis and the psychoanalytic treatment starts, in a way, with Freud's understanding of the hysterics polarizations, internal polarizations. So in some ways, I'm not so sure the challenges are so different. However, the being drawn into polarizations as we know in the history of psychoanalysis, is very extreme. And the politics of psychoanalysis has been, well, we know it's a very painful history of how psychoanalysis has survived and continues to survive. And we have a lot of controversies in the history of psychoanalysis, which I don't think we should ignore. It's how we work through some of those traumatic parts of our history. So we have to there's ongoing work to do, and how we retain our organization today and how we can stay democratic in our organization. And one of the issues that we have at the moment is how large do we want to grow? Because when you look at the aim of disseminating psychoanalysis, that doesn't necessarily mean you have to be bigger and bigger and bigger. So I think for the future, we have to now look at what has happened in the past, look at some of the mistakes of the past, and work out what is in the best interests of psychoanalysis in the future. And that includes discussing these things with the IPA, because all of us are members of the IPA. We depend on the IPA to some extent, but we are not a statutory organization. We have the privilege and the freedom to be a scientific organization, which I think is really important that EPF retains. However, we do have to think about our relationship with IPA. And I know that many of the European societies are very keen to work out what that actually means to be connected with IPA. And there's a tension in the EPF amongst the members of the EPF. So I think this is how we have to be open as well. We have to be transparent. Because as soon as small groups start to divide and don't make use of the forum, the scientific exchange, because although we don't have to monitor training requirements, we do still facilitate a space to think about training, to think about ethics, to think about what it means to be a psychoanalyst in the contemporary world, and how we can pass on the baton, as it were, pass on the work of our ancestors, and to facilitate a future EPF that will go on for another 60 years, we hope, because we have national identities as well as theoretical identities and group identities. And so one of the things I felt was really important in the symposium program was to develop the idea of a dialogue, so that each panel has been devised with a general title related to the general argument, but then consisting of a member of the executive with somebody that they selected because they felt they could work with that person, not necessarily because they agreed with every word, but they felt that they could have a robust discussion. It would include differences and similarities, but out of it, something new might come. Something could be co-created, and that's the way we're thinking about the symposium. We are preparing a book of the symposium, and in the book there will be the panels, but also we're going to include sections where people's contributions will be published. Keen that people in different areas of the world will be interested in attending the symposium, and we're interested in their contributions. And this is where we'll get a multitude of identities and different arguments, which I think will be very interesting. To then have a book of it will be fantastic. We're looking forward to doing that post-symposium.